There are three villains from The Simpsons that are completely misunderstood, and Frank Grimes is the perfect character to start off our list. Frank was a new employee at the Springfield nuclear power plant, and honestly, he was an asset to Mr. Burns' company. Frank was a hard worker who pushed himself hard no matter what task he was doing. In fact, that was part of the problem. There's no doubt that Grimes wanted to do well and succeed at his job, but he just happened to be surrounded by a ton of people who couldn't care less, including Homer. Seeing Homer succeed despite his lack of drive and intelligence drove Grimes crazy. Grimes really started to hate Homer Simpson right away because he found him annoying, stupid, and dangerous. And at first, Grimes kept to himself, but then Homer started invading his space, like accidentally taking his lunch even though Grimes was on a special diet, and using his personalized stationery. This made Grimes dislike Homer even more, but at the same time, Homer thought Grimes was great, even calling him Grimy.
How's it going, Grimy?
Which Grimes absolutely hated. Things got worse when Grimes knocked a beaker of sulfuric acid out of Homer's hands, saving him from drinking it, but in the process, destroyed a wall. Homer just pointed at Grimes and blamed him for the damage when Mr. Burns asked who was responsible. So as a result, Grimes got a stern warning and a pay cut. He told Homer they were mortal enemies from that point on. Trying to make peace, Homer invited Grimes over for dinner. He went all out, making everything perfect, telling his kids to behave and having Marge cook a ton of lobsters. But this just made Grimes even angrier. He saw all of Homer's nice things as undeserved for someone so incompetent. Homer had a great life, a polite family, a cute baby, a genius daughter, a beautiful wife, a son who at the time owned a factory, a dream home, 2 cars, could afford lobster for dinner, won a Grammy, was friends with Gerald Ford, toured with the Smashing Pumpkins, and had even been an astronaut. Meanwhile, Grimes had to work so hard for everything, had a second job at a foundry, and all he had was a briefcase, a haircut, and a one-room apartment
above a bowling alley and below another bowling alley.
Grimes called Homer a total fraud, thinking he was undeservedly rewarded for being lazy and ignorant, while he himself had so little. To make things worse, none of the other employees at the nuclear power plant seemed to care about the problems Homer caused. They just told Grimes not to think about it, and that Homer was a good person despite his many faults. Things only got worse after that. Grimes even tried to show everyone just how much of an undeserving moron Homer was, by tricking him into entering a kids' nuclear power plant model building contest. But instead of failing, Homer won with his entry, which was just a copy of the current power plant, but with added fins for wind resistance and a racing stripe. The crowd went wild, and Grimes finally lost it, calling everyone at the plant insane. In a complete breakdown, Grimes started running around the plant mocking Homer until he saw some high-voltage power cables, saying,
"What's this? Extremely high voltage. Well, I don't need safety gloves because I'm Homer Simpson."
Before being fatally electrocuted. Grimes was buried at Springfield Cemetery, where Homer, in typical fashion, accidentally made a mockery of the funeral by falling asleep. When he woke up and told Marge to change the channel, the funeral attendees, including Reverend Lovejoy, burst out laughing as the coffin was lowered into the ground. So as you can see, Grimes wasn't really an evil guy. He was high-strung, yes, but he was also driven to the edge after seeing how someone as lazy and laid back as Homer was doing so well. You can't really blame him for being a little ticked off, can you? Did he go too far and become way too obsessed with Homer? Of course he did. But it's easy to see why he got to that point. Now, Mr. Burns is a villain. You might be thinking, Mr. Burns, really? Yes, it's hard to grasp the concept of anything about Mr. Burns being misunderstood. He's just an evil guy, right? There's nothing redeemable or misconstrued about him. But it's not that easy. There is absolutely no doubt that Burns is the worst Springfield resident now. But his journey and past make it easy to understand why that is. To understand that, we have to go back. Way back. Mr. Burns is pretty much the walking, talking stereotype of corporate America, always chasing more wealth and power, even if it means dipping into some shady criminal activities. Remember when he tried to run for governor just to keep his plant from being shut down? Or that time he tried to sell uranium rods to terrorists for a quick buck? Classic Burns. He's also the quintessential forgetful boss, never remembering his employees' names, especially Homer's. It's almost comical considering they interact more than Burns does with anyone else at the plant, but you can chalk that up to his old age. Safety and well-being of his employees? Not a priority. He even laughed when a window washer fell from a building. Yet beneath all that villainy, there's a sliver of kindness, and that is why he is misunderstood in some ways. There was a time he felt sorry for Homer losing his new hair, realizing everyone only liked Homer for his hairstyle, and despite his usual terrible treatment of Smithers, Burns has a soft spot for him, especially since Smithers' dad saved the plant from a meltdown in the 60s. Burns' ultimate goals? Becoming Springfield's richest man and making Homer Simpson's life a living nightmare. He fires Homer repeatedly, but always ends up rehiring him. And let's not forget his sentimental side, shown through his deep affection for his lost teddy bear, Bobo. Bobo is a major reason for Burns' nature, and why he's misunderstood. He meant a lot to young Monty Burns as a child, but was lost. Bobo the bear traveled all over the world, but eventually fell back into Burns' life. Montgomery's quest to reclaim Bobo showed how ruthless he could be, but it also proved that, at his core, he's just a little boy who misses his teddy bear. In a moment of true tenderness, Burns even told Maggie to cherish Bobo when he saw how much she loved it, hinting at the innocence he lost long ago. Make no mistake, Burns is not a good guy by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, he's done some of the worst things in the history of The Simpsons. He blocked out the entire sun, after all. But his evil nature didn't just develop in a vacuum. Instead, it was caused by his past. Now, finally, George H.W. Bush, former president of the United States and misunderstood Simpsons villain. Bush didn't spend a long time in Springfield, but he definitely made an impact in one of the best Simpsons episodes of the 7th season. He ended up being the antagonist of the episode after he and his wife Barbara decided to settle in Springfield, looking for a place where politics took a back seat. They picked Springfield because it had the lowest voter turnout, meaning folks there really didn't care much about political stuff. While George got on just fine with the ever-friendly Ned Flanders, Bart Simpson was a whole other story. Bart's misbehavior was a constant headache for George, even though Barbara and Bart got along pretty well. Things escalated when Bart destroyed George's newly typed memoirs. Furious, George spanked Bart, not just for shredding his work, but for being an all-round pest. When Homer found out, he launched into a series of pranks to get back at George, leading to a wild fist fight that started in the sewer but spilled out onto the street. George eventually apologized for spanking Bart in front of Mikhail Gorbachev, explaining that he couldn't appear weak in front of the Russians. Right after that, he told Barbara they were packing up and leaving town. Barbara, who had become friends with Marge Simpson, apologized for their sudden departure. Yeah, there's no doubt that George Bush should have kept his hands off Bart, and things escalate way more than they should have. At the same time, you can't blame him for being upset at Bart and the way he was acting. We all know that he's a bit of a handful and can rub some people the wrong way, especially those who are by the book and like order. And when Bart ruined Bush's memoirs, he really went too far. George Bush was looking for a quiet, relaxing life after retirement. The only problem was that he chose to search for that in Springfield, living across the street from The Simpsons. That ended up being his biggest mistake. There are many more villains who have populated Springfield over the years, but these three, well, they aren't as bad as some people think. Yes, they have done some horrible things, but when you really think about it, you understand where they're coming from, right?